Right, so this talk is called The Myth of Pseudo Addiction. In the present times, I'm getting diverted too much onto other issues about this COVID pandemic. I usually deal with physics, but the same problems that affect physics affects the other sciences, in this case dealing with medical science. For the sake of this talk, I will treat pseudo addiction as a myth, but really it's more complicated than that and arguable. This talk would deal with the problems of believing in pseudo addiction. If pseudo addiction really exists, then believing it can result in misapplying that belief and giving medical malpractice. So really what we're dealing with is more word games, an issue I dealt with in physics context normally. Scientists play a lot of word games, and in politics there's also a lot of word play. When try to change the meaning of words, invent new words, terms, etc. When debating. It's all about what I call moving the goalposts, where you end up changing things to what was originally stated. So this is from the dictionary, defines pseudo addiction. You look at the first one, it says a drug seeking behaviour that simulates true addiction, which occurs in patients with pain who are receiving inadequate pain medication. So basically what it means is you can look like you've got an addiction, but in actual fact you have a pseudo addiction. So if you see a person who looks like a drug addict, maybe he's not a drug addict, maybe he's just suffering from pseudo addiction, and that's what this particular term is supposed to mean in this context. So the sort of thing online you see is pain management website, this one cited, telling you this sort of thing. This is pain management and spine care, and it telling you what is the difference between addiction and pseudo addiction. It tells you when you hear about somebody having an addiction, what's the first thing that comes to mind? Smoking, question mark, alcohol, question mark, sex, question mark, drugs, question mark. Oh, you can get addicted to smoking, you can get addicted to alcohol, you can get addicted to sex, and you can get addicted to drugs. It is true that more and more people are becoming addicted to alcohol and drugs, especially opioids. But while we might know what an addiction is, have you ever heard about pseudo addiction? And so it goes on, before we set out what pseudo addiction is, let's clear about what a real addiction is, as this term can mean a lot of things to a lot of different people, So it's a case of the words changing their meaning, word play, as I've pointed out. As you go on with the article, it goes on to say, in contrast, pseudo addiction is quite a new concept developed by pain specialists in the 1990s to describe desperate drug seeking that is caused not by true drug addiction but by the under-treatment of pain. So up until the 1990s, there was, if you looked like a drug addict, then you were a drug addict. But in the 1990s they decided that there was this thing invented called pseudo addiction, and that meant if you looked like a drug addict, maybe you were not a drug addict, maybe you had pseudo addiction. And so the method that was being used for those trained to believe in pseudo addiction, for a patient on pain-killing drugs, if the patient goes to a doctor and they look like they're a drug addict, is not to think of them as a drug addict, but to think of them as having a pseudo addiction. And when you believe that, you then increase the doses of the drugs you're giving them. and this is going to be explained in more detail from this documentary called The Crime of the Century. It's quite a long documentary, and I'm just going to show a little part of it on the issue of pseudo addiction. So let's play it now.
A whole generation of doctors bought into this idea that it's okay to use opioids liberally as long as you're giving them to a patient in pain. That somehow there's a magic halo effect with that prescription pad and your patient won't get addicted. And if they look like they're getting addicted, they're not really addicted, they're pseudo-addicted. And what pseudo-addiction?
Pseudo-addiction is when a patient is looking like a drug addict because they're pursuing pain relief.
Pseudo-addiction was a made-up word.
It only came out about 1990, but it's crucial.
In a single case report, the doctors who wrote that case report said, we discovered that this individual who looks like someone who's addicted isn't really addicted, they are pseudo-addicted.
Relief-seeking behavior mistaken as drug addiction.
They're really in pain, and you just need to go up on the dose.
A lot of this comment when you bring in David Haddix.
One of the authors of that study was Haddix, who went on to work for Purdue Pharma and was a lead spokesperson for them around more opioid prescribing.
No one's talked about the patients.
There was never any science behind the concept of pseudo-addiction.
This message about pseudo-addiction is probably the single most dangerous message in this whole campaign, because it's exactly the opposite of what a prescriber should do.
A lot of us were, at that time, still today, wonder sometimes if addiction is really behavior, how do we differentiate a behavior that is really somebody experiencing unrelenting pain, or they want the drug for the psychological effect? You know, I've been criticized because I said the treatment of one option in trying to understand if it's pseudo-addiction, the treatment should be give more drug.
The idea of pseudo-addiction, that was talked about in training a fair amount. The way you need to explain it to the physician was false addiction. They do look like they're becoming addicted or drug seeking, then that's a sign you need to increase the dose. It made sense when your eyes are glossed over with the mission to treat untreated pain. It filled right in a gap of any of your knowledge, and the story seemed to build on itself. Yeah, that makes sense, pseudo-addiction. Well, looking back on it, that's pretty hypocritical and crazy.
You don't think that there was a great enthusiasm for higher doses without being concerned about the possible downside?
Oh yes, absolutely. I think that there was a lot of enthusiasm. I owned it because I thought I could just give enough and my patients would have a normal life. I know, and all anesthesiologists know, you can give enough opioid to take away the pain. The problem is, will they be awake or alive?
So there's a lot more on the documentary Crime of the Century, and it's dealing with the opioid crisis in the USA. So they've created a lot of drug addicts in America because of the belief in pseudo addiction. I've been just concentrating on this bit called pseudo addiction, and it's highlighting the mess of believing that as to contributing to the mess of increasing drug addicts. And it turns out to be convenient for Big Pharma to believe in pseudo addiction, because it then gives them the opportunity to sell more drugs. It creates profits. So this is the sort of thing on the internet, on papers written dealing with pseudo addiction, and this paper by Green and Chambers is questioning whether pseudo addiction is real or not. An investigation of the medical literature. So really it's still arguable over whether it's a true thing, but if it is a true thing, then the belief can be misapplied and you can end up making a lot of profit selling lots of drugs. Modern science can suffer from inventing things that just don't really exist, i.e. it creates its own myths. And once you realise that you can easily invent myths in medical science, then you can realise that you can do it in all the sciences. And the one I usually look at is the myth conceptions generated in Einstein's relativity. And that's it, thank you. So you should really be aware of the dangers that science can give you. If you believe in science too much, well, you can actually believe things that are myths. Thank you.